Hey everybody, welcome to the Catholic Bible Study. My name is Father Brian and I am delighted to be with you. We have a question about the Mass, about Jesus on the cross. It's really good. It's really great, and I'm going to do my best. We'll try. I love the question, and there's so much to talk about, but I think it is going to be a worthwhile discussion. So anyway, let's dive in. Here's a question. Someone writes, I had a few questions and wondered if you could discuss about the Mass in the Bible. Since the Holy Mass is a sacrifice, can you explain the connection between Jesus' sacrifice on Calvary and the Last Supper? I know Jesus talked about a new covenant, but did he become Catholic? Was he always Jewish if he was teaching about a new way? Did he consider himself Jewish even at the end on Calvary? Oh man, these are really great questions. Anyway, so here's the deal. First, let's start with this. So, to be Catholic is to be Christian. So if we are Catholic, that means we believe in Jesus and we follow after him. And this is kind of an interesting thing, that the first followers of Jesus were not originally called Christians. In fact, I think it's in Acts chapter 12, where it says that it is in Antioch for the first time that they were called Christians, that the followers of Jesus were called Christians. Before that, when Paul, for example, when Saul, so Saul becomes Paul, so Paul and Saul are the same person. When Paul is going around and arresting people, arresting followers of what? They call them followers of the way. So one of the ways that they referred to those who believed in Jesus are those who are followers of the way. Who is Jesus? He is the way, the truth, and the life. So anyway, so the name Christian hasn't even always been around. It came, relatively early in Acts chapter 12. So that's like in the earlier days of the church for sure. But not all were they called Christians at the beginning. So that's a helpful thing. To be Christian is to believe in Jesus, to follow Jesus, to be a follower of the way. Okay, Jesus is Christ. So he can't be Christian because he is Christ. He's someone who rises above the title of Christian. He's the one, the Christ. So Christos in Greek means anointed one. In Hebrew, the word is Meshiach. So he's the Messiah. He is the anointed one, the one who's promised from of old and has now come. So in other words, he's the one who's going to gather the people of God together. So he can't be a follower of the one who's going to gather the people. He can't be a follower of the Christos, of the Mashiach, because he is that guy. He's the Christ. So he's not a Christian. He came as a Jewish man, and that's an important thing because everything that he does is done in a very Jewish way. And so that's really helpful for us to understand and interpret everything that he does. And we're going to look at the next part here in a minute. But to understand that, yes, he died as a Jewish man, but he died also establishing this new covenant, which is found in his church, which is the Christian church. And that's something that he didn't say, now you're the Christian church. In fact, we know, as I mentioned in Acts chapter 12, that it's only later on that it's like a development, which I suppose in some ways is kind of like a good way of showing that sometimes our understanding of the ways of God, it develops. Our understanding of doctrine develops. So anyway, so that I think just to help, because sometimes people want to argue, well, if it's not in the Bible right away, or whatever, and it's I appreciate everything in the Bible. We want to be faithful to it, absolutely. But there's also this understanding of, it's called the living tradition, that sometimes our understanding of doctrine, our understanding of Scripture develops over time. Doesn't mess with the original intentions by any means, but it does develop. Just like they were first called followers of the way, and I suppose we could still call ourselves that, followers of the way, because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. But now, more familiarly, we call ourselves Christians, Catholic Christians for that matter. Okay, so what's the deal? Okay, the connection between Jesus' sacrifice on Calvary and the Last Supper. This is really cool. So we know that in the Old Testament, God reveals himself through various degrees. He reveals himself kind of slowly to his people, beginning with Adam and Eve, but then even after Adam and Eve with Cain and Abel and all these different things. Along the way of God revealing himself to his people, there are really big moments, and those really big moments are called covenants, where God comes and he reveals himself in a deeper way. But even outside of the context of the covenants, there are still different ways that human beings have of interacting with God. And something that just seems to be, something that is so present throughout the entire story, the entire time of people interacting with God, is this notion of worship. This notion of offering sacrificial worship to God. And that is to say that we recognize that God creates us. And he, being the creator, he's the all-powerful one. He's the omniscient one, the all-knowing one. So he's omnipotent. He's all-knowing. He's omniscient. So like, this is who he is. And for that matter, he's always present, omnipresent. So omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. Those kind of big words, whatever. So anyway, so him being that, we owe him ultimately whatever he wants us to owe him. We owe him our lives because he's given us life. We owe him our worship because he's made it possible for us to live. So in other words, like he is worth more to us than any other being in the entire universe, because no other being can give us life. And so we owe it to him to show him how much he's worth to us. And so we offer him our worship. That's ultimately what worship is. We're showing God how much he's worth to us. And the goal of that is to show him that he's worth more to us than even our own selves are. That's the reality. So how is it that we show him that? Well, we show him that by way of sacrifice. And we see that this is kind of like, it's in so many ways, it's like built into our nature. We actually see this with Cain and Abel. So Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve, they're not given instructions by God, at least not in the Bible. They're not given instructions by God to offer sacrifice to him. And yet at the same time, we see in the story that they understand they need to offer sacrifice. It says that Cain is a tiller of the soil and Abel is a shepherd. Cain makes an offering from his crops, and Abel makes an offering of the first fruits of his flock. So in other words, there's an implication here that Abel gives among his best to God, and Cain gives just among his crop, whatever. So not necessarily implying that he gives the best. God, it says, accepts Abel's offering as more pleasing than Cain's offering. And again, that's not to say that offering an animal is more acceptable than offering vegetables, although my personal opinion might be that that's the case. But the point is that, again, Abel offers of his firstlings, while Cain just makes an offering. So anyways, the point here remains that there is something built into us that understands that we are made to offer sacrifice. And in offering sacrifice to God, it's not so much what we're offering, but what that offering symbolizes. For example, for Abel to make an offering of his first fruits, that is to like the first of the fresh flock of sheep, he's offering like the best part or the most secure part. There's no guarantee in anything. There's no guarantee that when the first sheep start having lambs, there's no guarantee that there are going to be more lambs coming. And so to offer him the firstlings of that new flock of lambs is pretty significant, because it's like, I'm offering you, God, my best. I'm offering you the thing that I don't have a guarantee of getting more of in the future. Whereas offering of, like, I've got a whole bunch of stuff over here and I'm just going to take some of it in it, and I'm not going to kind of distinguish between what's better or what's worse. I'm just going to take some of it and offer that. That's a worthwhile thing in a sense, but it's not as good of an offering as offering of your best. And so when we offer what is our best, it is like symbolic of offering God our entire lives. So this one Bible scholar that I listen to, he talks about how the sacrifices of the Old Testament, the sacrifices of animals and bloods and goats and all, we'll talk more about that with Moses, is what it is: ritualized self-offering. That in offering this animal, or in offering this choice portion of whatever it is, I am ritually, so let's say like I'm going through this ritual, I'm ritually offering myself to God. So it's like I'm attaching a part of my heart, or I'm attaching my entire heart to this thing in offering that to God in sacrifice. And so that's the reality. So we see this again throughout the entire thing. When Noah gets out of the ark, what's the first thing that he does? The first thing he does after the ark, the flood, and all that stuff, he builds an altar and offers a sacrifice to God. Abraham himself offers sacrifice. In entering into a covenant with God, he offers a sacrifice. There's this really kind of, I don't know, it's like a bloody kind of scene where he takes these animals, this like heifer, and he splits it in half. And there are other animals, and the whole thing here is that like they're splitting in half. And so it's like, this is how we enter into a covenant, apparently. And so that a sign of God's presence. It's like a pillar of smoke, comes and goes in between the two halves of the animals as a sign of like, look, if I break my covenant, if I'm unfaithful to this, may this be my end result, which is to be split in half. And of course, God can't actually be split in half. So it's just a sign of him like confirming that he's going to be faithful to his covenant. So anyway, so like there's these bloody sacrifices that take place. And then the sort of peak point of the sacrifice comes by way of Moses. When God calls Moses up on Mount Sinai, well, even before that, I suppose, actually before that moment, when they're stuck in slavery in Egypt, God tells Moses to tell all of the Hebrews to take a lamb and sacrifice that lamb. And in sacrificing that lamb, they're being faithful to what God has called them to do. But they're also to what to roast it. It's got to be a male lamb. It's got to be without blemish, and they're to eat the flesh of the lamb. So anyway, so to sacrifice this lamb, and then from there, that's kind of what launches them into the protection of God, as well as into the desert where they can be free from slavery. But then when they're in the desert, He institutes further sacrifices that are to be made on a regular basis. And who is it that is to offer these sacrifices? Is the priests. And to make a long story a little bit less long, the priests end up being the men of the tribe of Levi. So Levi is one of the sons of Jacob, of Israel, and it is his descendants who are chosen to be the priests. Originally it was all the priests, but there was, kind of a big mess up that took place. That's for another story, I suppose. But anyway, so the tribe of Levi are those who are to go into this place of worship, which is called the tabernacle, and later on it becomes the temple. But they are to go into this place of worship and offer these animals in sacrifice. The animals that the rest of the people, would bring to the Levitical priests to offer in sacrifice. And these sacrifices were made by these priests, and they were ritualized self-offering, as though when the people brought their animals to the priests, and therefore to the Lord, they were offering their entire selves to God. And that's kind of how the system worked. So within the sacrificial system, there were bloody sacrifices, the animals, but alongside of that, God also instituted other unbloody sacrifices. Sacrifices called, depending on your Bible translation, it could be like a grain offering, a cereal offering, an offering of bread, excuse me. So the cereal offering, it's not like Captain Crunch or Life Cereal or anything like that. It's just simply an offering of bread. So there were bloody sacrifices of the animals and unbloody sacrifices of bread, and oftentimes the bread sacrifices were accompanied by a libation, a wine offering also. So that was the case. And sometimes the bloody and the unbloody sacrifices would be combined into one kind of bigger offering. And that was actually the case that throughout the entire worship system, sacrificial system, there was one sacrifice that was offered twice each day, called the Tamid. So the Tamid, Tamid. And this can be found actually in Numbers chapter 28, verses 1 through 8. I'll just read through it here and I'll put it on the screen. The Lord said to Moses, "Command the people of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food for my offerings by fire, my pleasing odor, you shall take heed to offer to me in its due season. And you shall say to them, this is the offering by fire which you shall offer to the Lord. 2 male lambs, a year old without blemish, day by day, as a continual offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer in the evening. Also 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a cereal offering, mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil. It is a continual burnt offering, which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a pleasing odor, an offering by fire to the Lord. Its drink offering shall be 1/4 of a hin for each lamb. In the holy place you shall pour out a drink offering of strong drink to the Lord. The other lamb you shall offer in the evening, like the cereal offering of the morning, and like its drink offering, you shall offer it as an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to the Lord." Okay, so this Tamid offering is what it was called, the Tamid. So a lamb that was to be slaughtered, as well as a cereal offering, a bread offering with some oil, and its drink offering, which it says strong drink. So the implication here is that it's an offering of wine. And they would offer this every morning and every evening, twice a day. The priest would. And so the priest would be on this like rotation of coming and offering these sacrifices. But people had to bring their offerings. And I'm sure they also kept lambs there that people could purchase. So this is where we get into the whole thing of Jesus going into the temple and seeing that people were buying and selling pigeons and stuff. And he wasn't critiquing that people were buying and selling animals. He was critiquing where they were were doing it, that they were doing it right in the court of this one place. Again, that's a separate topic for a separate time. But anyway, this offering of morning and evening, morning and evening, morning and evening. And the Jewish tradition, so the Bible obviously doesn't give like a particular time that it needs to take place, just that it needs to be in the morning and in the evening. Jewish tradition is that these offerings were made at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. over and over and over and over and over again. So that was one of the sacrifices, the Tamid sacrifice. Another of the sacrifices is called the Todah sacrifice, T-O-D-A-H. So the word Todah, it means thanksgiving, and that's going to be helpful to remember further on down the road. But the Todah sacrifice is spoken about in Leviticus chapter 7, verses 12 or 11. I don't remember if it's 12 or 11. I've written down here 12, but in my mind, the number 11. Anyway, Leviticus 7, 12 through 15, where it says, "And this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which one may offer to the Lord. If he offers it for a thanksgiving," so that word would be todah, "then he shall offer with it the thank offering, unleavened cakes mixed with oil, unleavened wafers spread with oil, and cakes of fine flour well mixed with oil. With the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving, he shall bring his offering with cakes of leavened bread. And of such he shall offer one cake from each offering, as an offering to the Lord. It shall belong to the priest who throws the blood of the peace offerings, and the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving shall be eaten on the day of his offering. He shall not leave any of it until the morning." So there was this peace offering, which we can get into later on, but there was this peace offering that was made that was offered in sacrifice, which was an animal. And later on, or they could attach onto it this thanksgiving offering, which was a sacrifice of bread. So anyway, so that's a helpful thing to point out. So that's the Todah sacrifice. Now, so there are other sacrifices that we could talk about. Those are the two that I want to focus on because they're, I think, most connected to the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. There was an ancient Jewish belief that this temple, this place of worship, was built. An ancient Jewish belief that one day all of these sacrifices in the temple would stop. That something would happen that would bring an end to the temple sacrifices, except there was one sacrifice that would continue, and that one sacrifice was the Todah offering, the thanksgiving offering. Okay, so that's all helpful because then when we look at Jesus, the Messiah, the Christos, what do we hear him called? We hear him called in the letter to the Hebrews, the eternal high priest, the great high priest. But we also hear him called in the Gospels. John the Baptist calls him the Lamb of God. He looks at Jesus and he says, "Behold the Lamb of God." So Jesus is a lamb. And what that lamb, who is a male, he's without blemish, that Jesus, that Lamb of God, is sacrificed on the cross. When is he sacrificed? Well, the Bible tells us that he was nailed to the cross at about 9 a.m. And then the Bible also tells us that he dies on the cross at 3 p.m. So remember, the Tamid offering was an offering of a lamb with bread and wine. And that was offered in the morning, traditionally at 9 a.m., and in the evening, traditionally at 3 p.m. Now we have Jesus, the lamb, offered in sacrifice at 9 a.m., and he dies in the sacrifice at 3 p.m. Jesus, the lamb, without blemish, is offered. And what do we know before he gets to that point of the sacrifice is that the night prior at the Last Supper, he takes bread and he takes wine and he says, "Take this and eat it. This is my body. Take this and drink it. This is the chalice of my blood." So Jesus, and what does he say? He says, "This is my body, which will be given up for you. This is the chalice of my blood, which will be poured out for you and for many." So he's in the Last Supper, he's instituting this new sacrifice because he says, "Do this in memory of me." Which another way to translate that is, "Offer this in memory of me." So he's instituting a new sacrifice, which is a sacrifice of bread, which has become his body and blood, soul and divinity, and wine, which has become his body, blood, soul, and divinity. But nonetheless, it's an unbloody sacrifice. And then on the cross, he unites that unbloody sacrifice with his own bloody sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of a lamb, the Lamb of God, who has come to give his life and to take away the sins of the world. So when we come to Mass, that's ultimately what we're doing. We believe that we're in so many ways stepping outside of the time that we're in now And we are going back to the one sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, which was united and is united to the sacrifice offered at the Last Supper, with the bloody and the unbloody sacrifice. When Jesus says, "Do this in memory of me," what is the this? Well, our understanding is that the this is the Eucharist. That word Eucharist, this is what we call our Holy Communion. But that word Eucharist, it comes from the Greek word Eucharistia, which could also be translated into Hebrew as Todah. That is to say, the word Eucharistia means thanksgiving. So remember the ancient Jewish belief that all of the sacrifices of the temple would stop one day, except for the one sacrifice of the Todah, of the thanksgiving offering. And now Jesus is here instituting a new thanksgiving sacrifice in the new covenant in his blood, which is, again, a lamb and some bread and some wine. Of course, the bread and the wine are miraculously changed into his body, blood, soul, and divinity, and so they're more united, or they're fully united with his sacrifice on the cross. But that's what he's doing. Now, it gets even cooler, because what happens? About 40 years after this, give or take a few years, about 40 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, something happens. And that something is that Jerusalem is invaded by Rome. Rome kind of already occupied everything, but Jerusalem is invaded further by Rome under like a violent attack. And the temple is destroyed. The temple where all of those sacrifices took place, it is destroyed. Now, what we haven't talked about is that the temple was literally ordained by God as the only place where those sacrifices were allowed to take place. It is the only place of sacrificial worship for the Jewish people. So when the temple is destroyed, what else is destroyed is their entire sacrificial worship system. So that is to say that when the temple is destroyed, the Jewish people can no longer offer sacrificial worship according to the law that God gave through Moses. So what does that mean? It means that there came a day when all of the sacrifices of the temple stopped. But there was one sacrifice that did not stop. And that one sacrifice that did not stop was the new sacrifice instituted by Jesus at the Last Supper and on the cross. And that one sacrifice is the Eucharist, the sacrifice of thanksgiving. So that when we come to Mass, we're talking about that, how we are coming to participate in this unbloody sacrifice that Jesus has instituted one time at the Last Supper, that he instituted one time on the cross. That those two moments were united, and now today we believe that we like mystically. So this is kind of hard for us to experience because why? Because we go to Mass and we have human experiences at Mass. We experience that Mass is generally about an hour long, and if it's ever longer than that, then we also experience in a human way that some people get really upset about that. We experience Mass in human ways in hearing homilies that may or may not be good, that may or may not be bad, that may or may not be boring. We hear that kind of stuff. We experience Mass with music that, again, may or may not be helpful for our entering into worship. We experience all kinds of different things because we're sensible people. We have human experiences, and we're stuck in time and space. But we believe that there's a grace that comes through that we can't fully see, that there's a reality that comes through that we can't fully see, but we believe that reality is that we are transported, like according to God's divine time travel, we are transported in time back to the one sacrifice where we are now participating in that sacrifice. So sometimes non-Catholics will get on us Catholics and talk about how we talk about the Mass as a sacrifice and say, how can you say that you're sacrificing Jesus over and over and over and over again? Don't you know that the one sacrifice on the cross was sufficient? And our response ought to be, that is to say, it should be, yes, we do know that. And we're not sacrificing Jesus over and over and over and over again. We believe that whenever we come together to offer the Mass, we are actually we're transported in time to participate in that one sacrifice, to participate it in a new way, and to participate it in a fresh way, where that one reality is made present for us. And those people might not be able to believe what you're saying, but at least like we can communicate clearly, this is what we believe, that we're not doing it over and over and over again, but that every time we come together to do it, we are, again, going back to the one. We're going back to the one. We're going back to the one. And that because that one is all that there is. That one is everything. that one point, that one is the high point of human history, because it's where human history and divine history were able to touch, is what we say about the Mass, is that where heaven and earth kiss, or heaven and earth touch. Heaven comes down to the altar. Heaven, the timelessness of heaven, comes to us, and we enter into that timeless with the hope that we can be caught up into it. Even though we experience it in a very human way, the hope is that we can understand what we're doing and be caught up into the moment, caught up into the one moment of our salvation, which is such a beautiful thing. It's so good. So this is what we believe. There's probably better ways or further things that we could say about it, but I hope this is helpful for you. And if you find it helpful, maybe you can share it with other people. And if you have other questions or other things you'd like me to talk about, give my best shot to, by all means, leave those in the comments, and I'll be happy to. Okay, God bless you.